What's up? Yeah. My pumpkins fell. Hey, how's it going? Welcome back to my channel. My name is Gabby and today I'm gonna be doing my September wrap up. Yes, I am so excited that it is finally the end of September and Halloween is just right around the corner and I am so ready for it. As you can see, I've got my glowing pumpkins in the back and I painted my nails black and we are ready to go for the spooky season. First, we must wrap up September. So in the month of September, I read a total of 12 books. I read a whole mixed bag of genres this month. I read 5 thrillers, 1 horror novel, 2 romances, 2 contemporaries, 1 fantasy, and 1 literary fiction. And this month, I had 4 5-star books, 5 4-star books, 2 3-star books, and 1 1-star book. I also wanted to make a note that I did listen to 6 audiobooks this month, but I wasn't really listening to audiobooks just as audiobooks for a lot of this month. I was mostly listening to the audiobooks as I was reading the physical copy of the book, which helped me a lot, but I feel like I usually listen to more audiobooks than this, but this month in particular, I've really gotten hooked onto the Creepy Caffeine podcast. So I've been listening to that almost non-stop on the way to and from work. And so my audiobook game is a little bit low this month because I'm just so obsessed with this new podcast. Also, I did end up DNFing Mr. Mercedes by Stephen King this month. And I did say that I would mention why in this wrap-up video. And I guess the main reason why I ended up DNFing this book is just because I found the main character to be so freaking obnoxious. And I understand that Stephen King can be known to be pretty problematic at times when it comes to how he writes women and how, you know, he writes certain words and phrases that just aren't socially acceptable today. And if this book was published back in the day, I would be like, whatever, it was a different time period, you know, whatever. But this shit came out in 2014, okay? And I'm sorry, but the way he was writing women in this book just literally bugged me so freaking much. The main character was such a freaking creep. He had to describe the body of like every single woman he came across in this book in like the most vulgar, over-the-top way that was just so unnecessary. And not to mention the guy in this book that, like, the guy that you're not supposed to like, the serial killer, we read from his point of view too, and he uses the N-word pretty frequently, which is just like not cool, dude. And 2, he also kind of has this thing for his mom, I guess, and he's always talking about his mom and her panties and just like sexually objectifying her, and it's really gross and really weird. And I couldn't get past the freaking men in this book. I couldn't do it. This came out in 2014. Like there's no reason for it to be written this way. I'm not gonna do it. I DNF'd it after 200 pages because I just got so sick of listening to this dude talking about titties. Anyways, let's move right along to what I did actually read this month. I did realize too that most of the books that I read in the month of September, I have already talked about them to some capacity in a reading vlog that I've done. So all the reading vlogs that I did this month will be down below. So I'm going to try to keep this wrap up as brief as I can. But one of the books that I didn't read for a vlog this month was the first book that I read, and that was The Death of Vivek Oji. And this book, I listened to the audiobook for this on Libro as I was reading this book physically, and I finished it within 2 days, and this book broke my heart. This book honestly kind of reminded me a little bit of A Little Life, with the way that it gives you these beautiful ass friendships and beautiful ass writing and just makes you care so much about these characters, and then just goes in there and like sucker punches you in the gut. It did the same kind of thing for me that A Little Life did. It was just really sad and gut-wrenching. It's just basically this story about this family in Nigeria and how their son Vivek ends up in a body bag like on their front porch, and the parents are so confused and they're trying to figure out what happened. It's just devastating and so heartbreaking, and I was bawling my eyes out at the end of this book. Not even kidding. This was such an easy 5 out of 5 for me. Like, I really loved this book and I recommend it so much, but just know you're gonna get your heart shattered when you read this book. Alright, the next 4 books that I read this month were all included in a reading vlog that I did that was called like reading soft books that'll make me cry. The first one that I read for that video was Anxious People by Frederick Bachman. This one is like an adult contemporary fiction novel. It follows these 8 strangers who get taken hostage by this bank robber when they're at this apartment at like an open house kind of thing. The bank robber is robbing the bank, and then they kind of stumble upon this open house by accident, and then they just kind of like take hostage of all the people in there without really intending to. This is just a really freaking beautiful ass story that just really like restored my faith in humanity. And this book definitely talks about a lot of things like suicide and anxiety and depression. Like those are huge triggers for this book, so just know that going in. But I honestly just found this book to be so relatable and moving, and I love how Frederick Bachman is able to keep a really light-hearted feel to his books even when he's talking about something that's so serious. And I don't know, I just really enjoyed this one. I give it 4 out of 5 stars. And then next I read The House in the Cerulean Sea by TJ Klune. This book is the fantasy book that I read for this month, and this one is kind of like a contemporary book that just feels like magical realism at times. And in this story we're following this gay man named Linus, whose job is basically to go to orphanages and see if they're okay to operate still. And he happens to get assigned to this orphanage that is like this little house in the Cerulean Sea. And it's just a really soft, adorable story about Linus getting close to these children at this orphanage and kind of starting a relationship potentially with the guy who runs the orphanage. And it's really soft and it's really cute. And if you do read this book, I recommend reading it physically. The audiobook was just mediocre in my opinion, but this was a really cute time. I ended up giving this one 4 out of 5 stars as well. The next book that I read for that video was Loveless by Alice Oseman, and this book made me cry more than any book has in a really long time. If you don't know anything about this book, it's about this young girl who is discovering her identity and realizing she might be asexual and kind of like learning about asexuality and understanding what that means. It's one of my favorite books of the year. It's one of my favorite books that I've ever read, and I've never identified more with the main character, I think, than I did in this book. And reading this book was really fucking hard for me. Like, it was really hard to get through this book because it's just such a personal experience for me with this book, so this was an easy 5 out of 5. I don't really want to go into more detail than that, so if you want to see my full thoughts and see me break down in tears over this book, then you can watch the vlog I posted earlier this month. And then the last book that I read for that particular video was Heartstopper by Alice Oseman, which this is one that I was so freaking excited about. And this one's a graphic novel and it's a male-male romance, and this was a 5 out of 5 for me, and I'm really looking forward to getting into more of the graphic novels in this series. I know there's a few more that are published, but it's just like the softest, cutest, like kind of high school romance, but it's like slow burn and it's just beautiful. Like, Alice Oseman is just such a beautiful writer, and I love that the insides are like mint colored and black and white and like stunning. We love it. All right, the next 3 books that I read this month were all the books that I read for my next installment of my reading 3 thrillers videos that I do now. The first one that I read for that was The Nothing Man, and this one was a really interesting book because this one feels really like true crime to me, because we're following this girl who is writing her story about how she survived the Nothing Man when she was a kid. Like, the Nothing Man was this serial killer dude who came into her house and murdered her whole family, her sister and her parents, and she somehow survived it, and now she's writing her story called The Nothing Man. She's publishing a book called The Nothing Man, talking about her experience. And then in this book, in alternate chapters, we get to read from the point of view of this guy Jim, who is the Nothing Man, and kind of read about him reading her book. Like, he's finding out about her book and reading her book, and it's crazy. And I just really enjoyed this one. I feel like this one definitely has a really slow start, but once it gets going, it just really gets going, and it has such a good plot twist towards the end, and I just had a really great time with this one. So this was a 4 out of 5 for me as well. And then I read When No One Is Watching by Alyssa Cole, and this is another one that is a thriller, but I don't necessarily know if I would call this one a thriller myself. I do feel like this one has more contemporary romance kind of vibes, but just like some unsettling, uncomfortable things happening throughout the book. I just don't really know though if I would classify this one as a thriller, at least not until the last like 50 pages or so. But this one's following this black girl who's living in Brooklyn, and then we're also following this guy Theo who has this white girlfriend who is pretty racist. There's just some things happening in this town that are just really creepy and just like not okay. The ending of this book is definitely surprising and definitely worth it though, because I thought the ending was just so shocking and crazy and mind-boggling, and it was just truly terrifying. But I do feel like this book took so long to pick up its steam. Like I was saying in that video, like if I wasn't reading this book for that video, I might have been tempted to DNF it, but I ended up giving this one 3 out of 5 stars just because I did think the ending was super good. Unlike this next book that I read, which was One by One by Ruth Ware. I went into this book with such high hopes because The Turn of the Key is one of my favorite thrillers that I've ever read in my whole life. And this book ended up being the 1-star book of the month. I absolutely hated this book. This one is an adult thriller where we're following this group of people who are all part of the same company, and they're going up to this mountain vacation place. And at the beginning of this book, we find out that some of them get murdered, and it ends up being kind of like an Agatha Christie scenario where somebody's picking them off one by one. This book was so incredibly boring, like so fucking boring. Not only that, but I predicted the killer from like literally the first page. It's just so fucking obvious. And like, oh my god, the amount of times this company had to talk about like their shares and their numbers and like information about their company that I just could not give two shits about. It was ridiculous. It was just one of the most boring thrillers I've read maybe ever. And yeah, I don't know. I feel like if you're looking for a book that has this kind of vibe, just read The Hunting Party by Lucy Foley. Like it's like even The Hunting Party, it's not that great, but it's still better than this. The next book I read this month was a reread, and that was The Last Time I Lied by Riley Sager. And I ended up rereading this one because over on my friend Allie's channel, we did a live show for this book. And so I wanted to reread this book just to like touch up on my memory because it's been a while. I will link the live show down below if you missed it because it was a really fun live show. Like those girls were so much fun. And this thriller was such a fun book to read again. Like I had forgotten so many of the plot twists in this book that I was completely shook when I read this again. I loved reading this book at this time of year too, you know, because it's like summer camp vibes, but it's like, is it paranormal? Is it not paranormal? Like I just love that so much in the thriller. Basically in this book, if you didn't know, it's following this girl Emma who was this camper at this camp back in the day when all of her roommates in the cabin went missing. All 3 of the girls that she was rooming with went missing one day. And now this book takes place 15 years later when she's coming back to that same camp as a camp counselor, and she's trying to figure out what happened to those girls and trying to uncover the truth of her past. And it's just so good. It's really, really good. I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. I don't think it's quite on the same tier for me as Lock Every Door and Home Before Dark, but this one is still so freaking good. The next book I read this month is Night Shift by Stephen King. This is his first ever short story collection that came out in like 1970 something, and this collection was really good. I did an entire reading vlog dedicated to this book, so I'll have that link down below, and I really had a great time reading this. I gave it 4 out of 5 stars, and some of the standout stories to me that I will remember forever are Quitters Inc., Graveyard Shift, The Mangler, and The Boogeyman. Those are definitely my favorites. And then the next book that I read this month was The Roommate, which is this romance novel that was just so great. This is definitely like one of my biggest guilty pleasures that I think I've ever read. This was just written so well, and I just can't even believe how much I love this couple and this ship. So in this book, we're following this guy Josh and this girl Clara, and Josh is a porn star and he works in the porn industry, and Clara finds herself being roommates with him when her friend Everett, who she was supposed to be roommates with, is like, no, I'm going on tour with my band, and then she gets screwed over and has to live with this guy that she doesn't know who is actually a porn star. And this book takes place in Los Angeles. I don't know what it is about this book, but I just loved it so fucking much. I love that this book kind of talks about the porn industry, and you know, like I just feel like books never really talk about these things, especially in romance novels like this, but it is actually really fascinating to learn some things about the porn industry and to see kind of like how people are affected by, you know, like, because in society we just don't accept, you know, going into porn as like a career option. That's like a great career option, you know. We kind of like judge and shame people who go into those careers, and the discussion about that in this book is very interesting. And not only that, but oh my god, the freaking chemistry between Josh and Clara, holy shit. This is like one of the steamiest books that I've ever read, and I was here for it. I was here for that. I freaking loved Clara, and I freaking loved Josh, and like their banter was some of the best that I've read in a while, and this is definitely one of my favorite romances of the year. It's a total guilty pleasure. I adore them. Every time I think of this book, it makes me smile. I was pretty giddy the whole time I was reading this because they were just so cute. And the situations that the author puts these two characters into, it's kind of like forced togetherness, you know, because they're roommates. And oh my god, it was just amazing. So good. And I ended up giving this one 4.5 out of 5 stars. It's a new fave. And then the last book that I read this month was The Inheritance Games. This one is a young adult thriller novel, and young adult thrillers usually aren't my thing. I don't know what it is about young adult, but it just doesn't super intrigue me as much as it used to. I don't know why, but the main characters always tend to drive me nuts in young adult, but this one is a young adult thriller, and I was intrigued by this one because the premise basically said, if you love Knives Out, then you'll love this book. And me, being a huge ass fan of Knives Out, wanted to check this out. So I downloaded the audiobook from Libro, and in this book we're following this teenage girl who is really struggling to get by. And then we find out that this billionaire dude who she doesn't know, has never met in her life, has decided to give her his entire inheritance, like all of his money, all of his belongings, everything. And then his 4 sons are like, what the fuck? Why is she getting all of our shit? Who the fuck is this? And this book was fine. I really had a fun time with this book with the first like 100 pages, or about like the first half of it. I thought it was really interesting and really funny and cool, but it was also kind of like so similar to Knives Out to the point where it was kind of like, I mean. And then also, don't get me started on the freaking love triangle in this book, because of course it's a young adult novel, so the author's gotta force in some romance even where it doesn't need any romance. But I don't know, I feel like this book could have been so much better, and it should have been a lot more fun than it was. It just kind of got tedious for me after a while. So I feel like I kind of have the unpopular opinion of like not really loving this one the way that I expected to. So I ended up giving this one 3 out of 5 stars. I had a lot of fun with the beginning of this, but by the ending it definitely just got kind of like boring, and I was just like waiting for it to end. And I didn't know that this is the first book in a series. That would have been nice to know, because it ends on a major cliffhanger, and like I don't want to read a whole series. Alright, well those were all the books that I read in the month of September. Please let me know, how many books were you able to read in the month of September? What was your favorite book that you read this month? And again, all of the reading vlogs where I read most of these books will be included down below if you missed them. And yeah, oh my gosh, October is nearly here. I'm so excited, I can't even believe it. Alright, thank you so much for watching as always, and I will see you very soon with a new video. Bye. What are we fighting for? I can't do this.